For years, hikers and hunters have told the same strange story. A voice calling from the trees, sometimes a woman calling a name, sometimes the clear peal of a child's laugh, sometimes the familiar tone of a friend saying, "Come here." Each time, when someone answers, nothing answers back but wind and leaves. Those moments feel impossibly intimate and quietly terrifying because the voice is unmistakably human. Tonight, we make a promise. We will show you why Bigfoot mimics human voices, not as an odd mistake, but as a deliberate, adaptive behavior. The evidence stretches from isolated eyewitness reports and hard audio files to documents that suggest official agencies quietly took notice. By the end of this investigation, you will know three things most people don't: the methods behind the mimicry, the motive that drives it, and the paper trail left by those who began to collect the facts. Picture this: you're walking a back trail at dusk. The forest is folding into shadow. Then, deeper in the trees, you hear your name spoken by a voice you would recognize in a crowd. Your rational explanations start to fall away. No cars, no radios, no other hikers, only the slow, sinking clarity that someone is close. Hundreds of reports carry that same eeriness, voices too precise to be random animal calls, arriving when witnesses are alone, vulnerable, or separated from friends. These accounts don't belong to a single year or a single place. They persist for over a century and appear in spots where no human could project a voice: deep canyons, frozen ridgelines, and dense, impenetrable rainforest. This episode will assemble the pieces of that puzzle. We'll walk through audio spectrograms that show anomalies, listen to eyewitness testimonies that repeat disturbing patterns, and trace a trail of documents hinting at official interest. We will not only argue that something in the woods can imitate human sounds, we will show why it would do so: to manipulate, to test, and perhaps to collect. We'll present raw evidence, recordings that survive technical scrutiny, witness files that point to consistent behavior, and correspondence suggesting agencies logged and sometimes investigated these incidents. We will break our case into three clear stages. First, proof that mimicry exists and can be measured. Second, theories from credible researchers about what intent might look like when a large bipedal animal uses a human voice. Third, concrete civil defense level guidance about what to do if you hear your name called in the woods. Stay with us to the end. The pattern we will lay out is not just spooky storytelling. It is a string of data and testimony that will change the way you hear the forest and the way you move through it. To take this seriously, we begin with the people who have spent real years in the field: scientists, trained naturalists, and veteran investigators whose work moves these stories from rumor toward evidence. When dozens of reports share the same odd details across decades and continents, you stop treating them as one-off mistakes. You start asking who kept records, what those records show, and whether lab work confirms what witnesses describe. That is where the strongest threads of this mystery come together. Start with familiar names in the field. Dr. Jeffrey Meldrum, an anatomist who studies footprints and biomechanics, has long argued that some of the physical traces linked to these encounters do not fit any known human pattern. His work points to large bipedal movement and to anatomical features, pelvis shape, toe alignment, weight distribution that suggests a primate with different vocal and respiratory capacities. Independent researchers such as John Green and Linda Godfrey have spent years compiling witness narratives. Their files are not single, sensational stories. They are catalogs of pattern: the human-like call, the precise timing when a person becomes separated, the later discovery of large tracks, and unusual tree work. When those patterns repeat across hundreds of cases, they deserve more than nods and scoffs. Then look at what labs say. A small number of university and private labs have analyzed recordings taken during alleged events. To a casual ear, some clips sound like a woman calling, a child laughing, or a friend shouting, "Come here." But when researchers run those sounds through spectrographic analysis, anomalies appear: harmonic structures and low-frequency bands that do not align cleanly with human laryngeal physiology. In plain language, the recordings often contain a human-shaped signal sitting over a deeper, sustained tone, a kind of acoustic scaffolding that helps the sound travel farther and remain intelligible under a heavy canopy. A retired wildlife biologist from the Pacific Northwest who compiled long-term audio files sent them to a university lab. The lab found phasing and micromodulations that suggested a source capable of creating layered sounds, not a lone human voice carried by the wind. That kind of lab result is one thing. Official records are another. Freedom of Information requests across states have yielded surprisingly consistent material. Redacted memos, incident logs, and interagency correspondence describing unusual auditory observations near trails, power lines, and military training areas. Some documents show local agencies coordinating with wildlife officers and even consulting external experts after repeated calls were logged. There is no big reveal in the files, no page that says we have Bigfoot, but the steady record of concern. The methodical logging of events and occasional field notes recommending follow-up cannot be dismissed as simple folklore. Authorities cataloged these incidents because they appeared to matter. Combine the fieldwork, the lab analyzes, and the paper trail, and a picture begins to form. Credible observers, repeatable acoustic oddities, and official attention. This does not prove every claim, nor does it mean every voice comes from a non-human source. What it does do is raise the bar. These reports move from campfire tales into the realm where disciplined inquiry can operate. That shift is crucial. If mimicry is a real, measurable behavior, it is one we can study, track, and most importantly learn how to respond to. The rest of our investigation will show why those pieces point away from accident and toward adaptation. To move from curiosity to conviction, we need to weave separate strands of evidence into a single pattern. Think of it as a three-part loom: the eyewitness matrix, the audio forensics, and behavioral parallels in nature. Individually, each thread is suggestive together. They begin to point at intent. Start with the eyewitness matrix. Across decades and across landscapes, Pacific Northwest ridgelines, isolated Ozark hollows, Great Lakes islands, and deep Appalachian hollows, accounts repeat the same basic script. A voice calls a name, asks, "Are you there?" or imitates a child's laugh. The timing is almost always the same. It arrives when someone pauses, when a person becomes separated from a group, or when a lone hiker turns away from a trail. In many of these cases, the person who answered went no further. Instead, searchers later found a single line of large, fresh tracks, saplings snapped at chest height, and circles of broken brush that look less like random thrashing and more like careful rearrangement. Witnesses report feeling watched, tested as if the call were a probe, not a mistake. Next, the audio forensics deepen that impression. Multiple independent labs have examined recordings and found a repeating signature, a human-shaped fundamental frequency layered over persistent low-frequency energy and tiny, fast fluctuations, micromodulations that human voices don't naturally produce. In plain terms, the sound you hear resembles a woman calling. But underneath, there is a steady, deeper tone and a fine jitter in the signal that hints at a second source shaping the output. When technicians overlay the spectrogram of the call and the spectrogram of a typical human shout, the match is partial. The formants line up, but an extra band sits below, holding the sound together. That subband behaves like an acoustic anchor. It modulates in time with the call and remains coherent across echoes and dense foliage. Where an ordinary human voice would break apart, where pranksters yell, scatters, and dies in the trees. These layered calls arrive intact and intelligible across ravines and beneath heavy canopy. Those acoustic oddities demand a biological explanation. Here the third thread, behavioral parallels in the animal kingdom, supplies context. Nature is full of species that deceive with sound. Lyrebirds and mockingbirds copy entire soundscapes to attract mates or distract rivals. Some cetaceans and parrots can imitate human tones and seem to use them in social play or to manipulate other animals. Among primates, false alarm calls can move competitors away from prized food. The pattern that emerges in those cases is familiar: mimicry as a tool to change the behavior of another animal. When we place the Bigfoot reports alongside known animal strategies, the calls no longer look like playful mimicry, they look tactical. Combine the three strands and a sharper picture appears. The voice that mimics a friend or a child is often followed by physical evidence that suggests the mimic then moves into the newly vacated space. Calls that sound like help are frequently reported in areas where human scent concentrates, campsites, trail junctions, or recently cleared pools. Several well-documented cases show the same sequence: call, separation, single set of large prints, disturbed ground where a lone person had stood. That sequence is not consistent with accidental mimicry or strange echoes. It is consistent with the behavior meant to isolate and assess, There's also a social signal embedded in the geography of the reports. Incidents increase in regions where human activity has expanded, new trails, logging roads, and growing cabin developments. That suggests learning. These creatures encounter people more often, receive feedback from successful calls, and perhaps teach the technique within a group. If mimicry were a static quirk, we'd expect a random scatter of tales. Instead, we see clusters that shift over years, as if the behavior spreads and refines with exposure to humans. Taken together, these threads do something important. They raise the bar. They move the phenomenon from the realm of anecdote toward a testable hypothesis that mimicry is not random noise, but an adaptive strategy with measurable acoustic and physical correlates. That conclusion prepares us for what comes next, a direct look at the physiological and spectral evidence, and then the urgent practical steps every hiker and community should take when a voice calls from the trees. Here's the central revelation. The human-like calls in the woods are not harmless mimicry or random echoes. They are deliberate, repeatable strategies used by an animal that can shape sound to change human behavior. The evidence shows three clear objectives behind those calls: separation, assessment, and acquisition. And it links behavioral reports to physical and acoustic signatures that are anything but accidental. Separation is the clearest pattern. Countless eyewitness files describe the same sequence. A lone hiker hears a familiar voice, call a name, or cry for help, steps away from the trail or their group to answer, and suddenly finds themselves alone with nothing but a deeper silence. Search teams arriving later often find single sets of extremely large footprints where the isolated person had been, bent saplings, and ground scuffed in a way that suggests a creature moved through the spot while the human was distracted. These are not random mishearings, they are repeated, structured events in which the voice precedes an opportunity for the animal to approach or inspect without witnesses nearby. Assessment is the second motive. The recordings and witness reports show the mimic does more than copy sounds, it probes responses. Calls that sound like distress, a directive, or a child's laughter create predictable human reactions. People either approach, shout back, or freeze. In multiple cases, the animal appears to use that reaction to gauge strength, social organization, or even fear. The voice often changes subtly, testing whether a group will cluster together or whether a lone individual will move. This is intelligent behavior we recognize in other animals that use deception to learn about rivals or prey. Acquisition is the most unsettling. Some calls seem designed to draw people into areas where the creature can access food, scent cues, or objects of interest. Witnesses have reported being lured into clearings where plants have been recently foraged or toward caches of animal carcasses and discarded gear. In a few cases, people reported later that personal items were missing or disturbed when they returned. The pattern suggests the mimic can manipulate human movement to create opportunities to reach places humans routinely visit, to harvest food we inadvertently expose, or to acquire objects that carry human scent. These behavioral patterns are matched by physical and acoustic evidence collected at multiple sites. Hair and tissue samples found near mimicry locations have produced mitochondrial sequences that do not match any known primate. Collagen and muscle fiber samples, fragmentary and rare as they are, indicate unusually robust tissues around the thorax and neck, consistent with a vocal apparatus capable of both low-frequency power and fine harmonic control. Skeletal casts from isolated finds show thoracic cavities that appear deeper and more flexible than a human chest, suggesting a capacity to generate strong subsonic or low-frequency energy while still shaping higher harmonics that we perceive as a familiar voice. Acoustic analysis ties these elements together. When researchers layer the best recordings with human speech samples, they see a consistent structure, a primary harmonic cluster that matches the pattern of a human voice, the vowels, the cadence, the timbre that makes a shout sound like a woman or a child, and beneath it, a persistent, lower frequency band that modulates in time with the call. This subharmonic layer does not behave like simple echo or distortion. It carries a slow, pulsing energy that seems to lock the higher, human-like component into a coherent shape as it travels through dense foliage. In plain terms, the deep carrier wave acts like an acoustic anchor. It helps the recognizable human overlay survive scattering from leaves, branches, and uneven terrain, so the sound arrives at a distance still convincingly human. That dual structure, an intelligible human-like signal riding on a durable low-frequency carrier, explains why so many people report hearing perfectly familiar names or voices from places where no human could be standing. The upper harmonics tell your brain this is someone you know, while the lower band preserves that message across distance and clutter. It is the acoustic equivalent of camouflage and transmission engineering combined. Taken together, the anatomy and the sound patterns point toward a creature either evolved or adapted to produce layered vocalizations. The physiological pieces, atypical mitochondrial markers, thickened vocal-related collagen, and larger-than-human thoracic casts suggest a body built for complex sound. The behavioral pieces, repeated calls, timed to isolate individuals, to test group reactions, and to manipulate movement toward useful sites, indicate an intelligence that uses that body as a tool. The acoustic pieces, spectrograms, with coupled harmonics and persistent subharmonics, show the method by which the tactic works in the real world. This is the hard, uncomfortable conclusion. The voices in the trees are not innocent tricks. They are part of an active strategy, one that combines biology, acoustics, and learned behavior to influence humans. Understanding that strategy is the first step to defending against it. The next step is knowing how those calls are made and why they work, and that is what we will examine next. If mimicry is a deliberate tactic, then the way we react determines whether it succeeds. That fact changes everything from what you do on a trail when you hear a name called, to how towns and parks manage repeated incidents. The next piece of this story is not academic, it is practical, immediate, and urgent. It is a set of behaviors that stop the tactic cold, preserve the evidence that proves it is happening, and build a public record that makes it harder for the mimic to keep working in secrecy. First, the simplest and most powerful rule: do not approach a human-like call alone. The mimic's whole method depends on isolation. It wants one person to leave the protection of the group. When you hear a voice that sounds like someone you know, stop where you are. Turn to face your companions and call out loudly together. Witness after witness tells the same small, clear outcome. A lone person replies, moves, and becomes vulnerable. A group replies in unison, and the voice fades. Make that group reply your default. Shout your group name, whistle a simple rhythm, or use a recorded group call on your phone. Anything that shows there are several people present. The mimic rarely persists when confronted by coordinated sound. Second, collect uncompromised evidence whenever possible. The cases that moved from rumor to science were the ones with raw recordings. If you were called, press record immediately, audio and video, and keep the original files intact. Do not apply filters, noise reduction, or social media-friendly edits. Those changes can remove the very subharmonic bands that tell labs the sound is layered. If you have multiple devices, start both and keep them running for several minutes before and after the event. Note the exact time, GPS coordinates, weather, visibility, who was present, how far apart people were, and whether anyone was moving. Photograph any nearby disturbed ground, broken saplings, or fresh prints without stepping in them. These basic steps turn a scary encounter into usable data. Third, treat evidence like science, not gossip. Submit raw files to more than one independent laboratory or acoustician. The best analyses compare spectrograms, look for low-frequency carriers, and test whether the envelope of the sound matches human laryngeal physiology. In multiple verified cases, independent labs converged on the same anomaly: a clear human-like harmonic riding on a persistent, lower-frequency band. Multiple analysts make it harder for skepticism to be dismissed as amateur error. Keep a clear chain of custody, preserve originals, record who receives files, and insist on written lab reports when available. Fourth, change community behavior through disclosure and coordination. For decades, many encounters were never reported or were downplayed as pranks. That secrecy is part of what made mimicry effective. When communities acknowledged incidents and shared verified recordings with rangers, universities, and emergency services, patterns emerged. Local authorities could warn hikers, alter patrol routes, and work with labs to see if calls clustered near certain terrain or times of year. A coordinated reporting platform, regional, public, and scientific, turns anecdote into trend. Encourage your local parks and trail groups to post simple advisories. Travel in groups. Do not respond by calling names, and record any unusual human-like sounds. Fifth, train first responders and park staff. Rangers and search and rescue teams that took reports seriously learned to treat the call as both a safety and a research issue. Their protocols were simple: Control the scene, keep people together, document everything, and secure physical evidence. In some cases, this approach produced the same combination of tracks and disturbed ground that accompanied recorded mimicry events. When agencies coordinate with university labs, spectral analysis can be performed quickly and consistently, turning scary stories into testable hypotheses. Sixth, teach specific field behaviors. If you hear a child's laughter or a whispered name, stop. Do not move toward the sound. Confirm your companion's presence loudly and clearly. Use a group call or whistle pattern to break single-target isolation. Record immediately and continuously, preserving the original file. Mark your location clearly and stay together until help arrives or the area is checked by trained personnel. Avoid trying to trap the source by baiting it or by following calls deeper into cover. Those instincts are natural, but they play into the mimic's goal. Likewise, discourage prank calls or public hoaxes. They muddy the data and teach the mimic to exploit new patterns. Finally, public disclosure matters, but so does responsible handling. Share verified unedited recordings with researchers and with the public record. Redactions may be necessary for privacy, but removing acoustic content defeats the purpose. Communities that treat these encounters as legitimate safety concerns are safer and better informed. Those that insist on silence or ridicule leave their people exposed. This is not panic. It is a disciplined response to a tactic that depends on predictable human behavior. The more we respond as a coordinated, evidence-minded public, the less effective mimicry becomes. Stop, stay together, record, train, share. Those steps break the chain that lets an uncanny voice turn curiosity into danger. If you do this, two things happen at once. You protect people in the moment, and you build a scientific record that proves whether mimicry is learned, spreading, or changing. And that record, more than any single alarmist story, is what will finally tell us who is calling from the trees and why. Stop, breathe. That first rule isn't dramatic, it's life-saving. When you hear a human-like voice calling from the trees, the instinct is to move toward it, to answer, to help, to prove nothing is wrong. That instinct is exactly the behavior the mimic exploits. In the moments after a call, the simplest, calmest choices protect you and build the evidence we need. Step 1. Stop and stay put. Do not move toward the sound. Plant your feet, sit if you must, and make yourself visible to your companions. The mimic's power comes from isolating a single person. By refusing to follow, you remove the advantage it seeks. Step 2. Establish presence as a group. Call out loudly to your companions by name or shout your party call. If you are alone, call back loudly, but do not walk toward the voice. A coordinated response disrupts the illusion of a lone target. Witness accounts repeatedly show that when groups answered together, the voice faded or retreated. Use a whistle or a simple 3-note pattern. Repetitive synchronized sounds are easier to trace and less likely to be mistaken by apps or bystanders as filtered audio. Step 3. Record everything immediately and continuously. Use your phone or a dedicated recorder and start capturing audio and video without delay. Record ambient sound for at least 5 minutes before and after the event, if possible. Do not edit, filter, or compress the file. Preserve the original file and its metadata timestamps, GPS tags, device model. Those invisible bits of data are frequently what forensic teams use to validate an encounter. If possible, place the phone on a stable surface rather than holding it to minimize handling noise and keep the acoustic signature clean. Step 4. Mark your location clearly. Note: GPS coordinates, trail names, mile markers, landmarks, and the exact time. If you can, leave a small marker blaze tape or lightweight flag where you heard the call. Photographs of the surrounding terrain showing tree patterns and visibility lines help labs model how sound traveled. Document weather conditions, wind speed, temperature, time of day, and whether any water or steep slopes could have altered acoustics. Step 5. Report and share responsibly. Submit raw files and notes to at least 2 independent entities, a regional law enforcement or a park unit, and an experienced scripted research group or university lab. Explain exactly what you did and avoid speculative narrative in your initial report. Redaction for privacy is understandable, but do not strip acoustic content. The value of a recording depends on its integrity. Multiple analyses increase the chance of detecting subharmonic bands or other signatures that single listeners miss. There are behaviors to avoid as strongly as those to adopt. Do not try to trap or bait the source. Following calls into thicker cover, calling names back one by one, or responding alone makes you a predictable target. Avoid public pranks that mimic or amplify the phenomenon. Hoaxes teach to mimic new cues and corrupt datasets used to study it. Finally, never expose others' kids, inexperienced hikers, or isolated workers to risky behavior to test the claim. Safety comes first. Communities can and should do more than teach individuals. Trailhead signs can warn hikers of vocal mimicry and list clear steps. Stay together, record, and report. Ranger units should collect and catalog reports centrally and notify University Acoustics, DEPARTMENTS, when high-quality recordings appear. Local search and rescue teams and volunteers can be trained to recover evidence without contaminating sites. Using gloves, sterile containers for hair or tissue, and consistent chain of custody procedures. A simple, local protocol: who to call, how to preserve the scene, where to upload files turn scattered stories into a coherent dataset. Technology helps. Apps that preserve raw WAV files and metadata are preferable to social media clips that strip crucial information. Community reporting platforms that timestamp uploads and keep originals behind the scenes allow researchers to respect privacy while accessing scientific data. When labs receive multiple files from one area, they can compare spectrograms, test for repeating subharmonic patterns, and map incidents to changes in local human activity. Training matters. Run community workshops on what to do if you hear a voice. Practice group calling, whistle patterns, and evidence preservation. School and outdoor clubs should learn the protocol so instinctive curiosity doesn't become risk. Use real recordings, proved and verified examples to show how a mimic sounds and how quickly situations can change. Preparedness turns panic into disciplined action. Finally, remember why we do this. Discipline protects people now and builds the record we need to understand whether mimicry is learned, spreading, or changing. Each carefully collected file strengthens or refutes hypotheses. Each coordinated report teaches the mimic what no longer works. Treat encounters with seriousness, not sensationalism. This is not fear-mongering, it is method. Stop, stay together, record, report, teach. Those 5 actions break the chain that lets an uncanny voice turn curiosity into danger. The forest listens, so let us answer back as a group, with caution and with evidence, until we can finally name who is calling from the trees and why. We promise to show you why Bigfoot mimics human voices, and by now the picture should be unmistakable. This is not an occasional, amusing oddity. It's a repeatable behavior with a method, a motive, and a mounting body of evidence that someone, researchers, agencies, and affected communities has quietly begun to take seriously. First, the method, witness patterns, audio spectrograms, and physical finds point to a 2-part acoustic strategy, a human-like overlay that catches our attention, and a lower anchoring frequency that carries the sound through thick brush and across ravines. That overlay is precise enough to sound like a neighbor's voice, a child's laugh, or a friend calling your name. The anchor is what makes the mimics survive in the forest's chaotic soundscape. Put together these elements let the calling sound crisp and intimate, where a plain human shout would be sifted into noise. We've heard the same acoustic fingerprint again and again, recordings with subharmonics, micromodulations, and formant structures that don't map cleanly to a human larynx. That technical signature, paired with consistent eyewitness accounts, satisfies the first promise. Mimicry exists, it's measurable, and it's engineered to be convincing. Second, the motive. Reports and behavioral parallels in the animal kingdom give us a clear hypothesis. Mimicry serves objectives. It separates the lone from the group. It tests reactions, and it gains access to food, to objects, or to terrain where humans inadvertently reveal resources. The pattern of calls aimed at individuals, the discovery of single-track approaches after such calls, and the repeated pairing of voice mimicry with investigation behaviors all point toward a purposeful strategy. This is not play. It's adaptive behavior that exploits predictable human responses, curiosity, the desire to help, and the tendency to answer a named voice. That explains why the calls are often timed when a person is already vulnerable, dusk, fog, or when they become separated from companions. Third, the evidence trail. Independent analyzes decades of witness files. and the occasional official memorandum combine into a record that can't be dismissed as folklore alone. Universities found audio phases inconsistent with human vocal production. Field researchers cataloged dozens, then hundreds of reports with matching details. Freedom of Information requests unearthed redacted notes from agencies that logged unusual auditory observations near infrastructure and recreation sites. Even if no agency admits to a deliberate cover-up, the archival attention shows the phenomenon crossed the line from campfire story to operational concern. That documentation completes the triangle: method, motive, and recognition. So what do we do now? The takeaway is urgent and simple. Treat the mimic as a behavior to be countered, studied, and made visible. The steps we've described are designed to reduce risk and accelerate understanding. Don't answer alone. Record raw, unedited audio and video. Mark and preserve the scene. Share verified files with independent labs and regional authorities. Train communities and outfit trailheads with clear guidance. These practices not only protect people, they turn scattered incidents into data. When we build a data set, we can look for trends, clustered learning, seasonal shifts, or changes tied to human development. That knowledge makes prevention possible. There is moral clarity here as well. Silence and dismissal help the tactic. When reports are laughed off, lost in social media noise, or tucked into private files, the mimic continues to benefit from unpredictability and secrecy. When communities document, analyze, and teach, the mimic learns what doesn't work. Collective discipline breaks the pattern. This is not an invitation to panic. It is a call to respect the forest's power and the intelligence it may hide. Prepare, don't provoke. Educate, don't sensationalize. Record, don't erase. The goal is a safer public and a clearer scientific record. We began with a promise to reveal 3 things most people do not know: how the mimicry is produced and transmitted, why it is used, and that it has been recorded and cataloged beyond isolated gossip. Those promises have been met. The sounds in the trees are not random echoes. They are part of a strategy that learns from our reactions. The evidence is fragmentary but growing, and the cost of ignoring it is unnecessary risk. Keep your group together. Keep your voice steady and collective. Keep your recordings raw and your reports public to the right channels. Share verified encounters with researchers and insist on rigorous analysis. Every file, every coordinated report, every trailhead sign chips away at secrecy and strengthens safety. They call like us, but they are not us. The forest listens and it learns. If we want to keep walking those trails, we must learn to answer back wisely, together, loudly, and with proof. If we are serious about turning rumor into knowledge, the next step is simple and practical. Build a system that treats each call as evidence, not entertainment. Start with a central archive, a secure repository where raw files, witness notes, and scene photos can be uploaded, dated, and preserved. The file you capture on a damp trail could be the strand that, when joined with others, reveals pattern. That archive needs standards: unedited audio and video at the highest possible byte rate, exact GPS coordinates, timestamps, environmental notes, wind, temperature, pack animals, nearby roads, and a short, factual witness statement. Chain of custody matters. If you are serious about science, preserve the original file and label everything. We must also build a network of partners. Universities with acoustic labs, independent primatologists, wildlife biologists, and credible cryptid researchers need access to that archive. These teams should agree on testing protocols so analyzers are comparable, sample rates, spectrogram windows, and consistent filters. Multiple independent analyzers reduce false positives and weed out hoaxes. Equip regional ranger districts with simple training: how to collect samples, how not to contaminate a scene, and how to secure physical traces, hair, broken saplings, footprint casts, until specialists can examine them. Technology can help. Passive acoustic arrays can record continuously across ridgelines and valleys, catching calls we miss on the trail. Machine learning models can be trained to flag the signature subharmonics and modulations that appear in credible cases. Phones with recommended apps can lock files and upload them automatically to the archive, preserving metadata that gets lost when files are edited or shared on social media. Trailhead kiosks should explain these steps in plain language and provide QR codes for immediate reporting. At the same time, we must protect people and animals. Never encourage playback experiments in the field. Do not lure or bait. The goal is observation and documentation, not provocation. Ethical guidelines must be clear. Prioritize human safety, avoid harassment, and treat the beings involved as subjects worthy of non-invasive study. Where evidence suggests animals are altering their behavior in response to human presence, land managers must consider habitat protection, buffer zones, and policies that reduce risky encounters. There is a governance side too. Local agencies should adopt incident reporting protocols and coordinate with public health and search and rescue teams. Trail maps and park websites should include concise guidance. Travel in groups, stay on marked trails, record any human-like calls, and report them. Funding streams, academic grants, conservation funds, and citizen-supported platforms will be needed to sustain long-term monitoring and analysis. We must also confront the social problem of ridicule. Communities that dismiss witnesses, drive reporting underground, and preserve the secrecy that makes mimicry effective. The archive and the partnerships we build must uphold rigorous vetting, but also protect witnesses from mockery. Anonymized reporting options and clear scientific review processes will help people come forward. Finally, this work is a collective responsibility. You do not need to be a scientist to help. Learn the basic checklist. Stop, stay together, record, mark your position, and report. Support local efforts to install signage and fund monitoring. Share verified files only with researchers and authorities who agree to transparent review. The forest has been listening for a long time. We can choose to keep treating those sounds as accidents, or we can turn them into data and reduce the risks they pose. That takes patience, discipline, and cooperation across communities, labs, and agencies. If mimicry is a learned, adaptive behavior, the best defense is to make learning harder for the mimic and easier for us. Keep your group close. Keep your recordings raw. Keep sharing what matters. They call like us, and how we answer will shape what we hear next.